It's the Sports Take Lunch Break, brought to you by Office Essentials, your hometown supplier of all the office products and furniture you need to grow your business. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Andrew Corns, and we are back with another episode. As you know, the last 4 weeks, Dan and I have been doing some quarantine specials, just the two of us. Well, this morning, Dan woke up feeling a little under the weather, so I'm going to attempt to rock this thing solo. So if you don't mind listening along, we'll do this. We're going to jump right into the headlines.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, the biggest story last week was obviously the NFL draft, so we're going to tackle that first. A quick recap. Quarterback Joe Burrow of LSU went number 1 overall to the Cincinnati Bengals, and defensive end Chase Young, who most consider the best player in the draft, went number 2 to the Washington Redskins. The main questions that most people are debating after the draft: what was the biggest surprise, who was the steal of the draft, and which teams ultimately won and lost. Before I get into all of that, it's also worth noting that the 2020 NFL Draft was the most watched draft of all time, more than 55 million viewers during the 3-day event, which averaged out to 8.4 million viewers watched per day. So it certainly tells you that in the absence of sports right now, we're all welcoming anything, and the NFL Draft virtually definitely capitalized on that. Before I go into all my surprises, who won, who lost, I think it's worth noting the 1 and 2 picks. So Joe Burrow went to Cincinnati. It's unfortunate, I think, because Joe Burrow is a really talented quarterback, but Cincinnati's kind of an albatross. Over the years, you've seen Carson Palmer and Boomer Esiason and a number of quarterbacks go to Cincinnati, and very few have had actual success. So I think Joe Burrow's got a lot to overcome there in Cincinnati with a bad ownership group. Chase Young, to me, seems like the can't-miss player in this draft. The Washington Redskins certainly got the guy that they wanted. It'll be ultimately interesting to see if he can transform that team from the defensive side of things. My steal of the draft is ultimately going to be CeeDee Lamb, the receiver that went to the Dallas Cowboys from Oklahoma. I think it was a surprise to a lot of people that CeeDee Lamb fell as far as he did. He was actually the 3rd wide receiver to be taken in the draft. He fell to the ultimate spot that he wanted to go, being an Oklahoma kid, Dallas just around the corner. I know Skip Bayless over the last couple of weeks leading up to the draft was very excited as a Cowboys fan himself to hopefully get CeeDee Lamb. That was the receiver that he felt was the best option. So they ultimately got CeeDee Lamb. You know, Jerry Jones is really happy about that one. As far as the biggest surprise, I think there's a few options you could go with here. The Chargers taking a quarterback, Justin Herbert, at number 6. Pretty big surprise to me. The Raiders taking Henry Ruggs III as a wide receiver at number 12. When Jerry Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb were both on the board, most people graded both of those guys as better overall receivers, but they ultimately took Henry Ruggs III. For me, the obvious biggest surprise of the draft was the Green Bay Packers taking quarterback Jordan Love at number 26, when we all know Aaron Rodgers is still the go-to guy for the Green Bay Packers at the quarterback position. What's really interesting is the parallels between Jordan Love and Aaron Rodgers. So when Aaron Rodgers was taken in 2005, he was the number 24 overall pick. At the time, the Green Bay Packers had Brett Favre at 35 years old. So they had an established quarterback, and then they bring in this young guy, Aaron Rodgers, who, you know, the reins were going to be turned over to. And obviously there was a tumultuous situation between the two of them, Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. They never got along very well. Ultimately, it led to Brett Favre going elsewhere, and Aaron Rodgers took the mantle. So now Jordan Love, the number 26 pick in 2020, so 15 years later, taking only a couple of spots different than Aaron Rodgers. While Brett Favre was 35 years old at the time, Aaron Rodgers is currently 36. So again, the parallels are very similar. You have to wonder, Aaron Rodgers has to believe he's got at least 5 or 6 years left in the tank, given what you've seen with Tom Brady playing well into his 40s. Aaron Rodgers is taking pretty good care of his body. So the question is, how long is Jordan Love going to be able to sit on the sidelines? Being a first-round quarterback pick, you'd assume, 1 to 2 years at max. So the questions will be asked if Aaron Rodgers has a long-term future in Green Bay. I don't know if that's the case or not. It will certainly be interesting to watch that play out. That's going to be the main drama leading up to this upcoming NFL season for sure. As far as a team that won the draft, I've got to give the Tampa Bay Buccaneers a lot of credit. They solidified their offensive line to protect Tom Brady. That was the key point. They've already got a load of options at receiver, running back. They just signed Rob Gronkowski, a trade from the New England Patriots. So there's a ton of weapons in place for Tom Brady, and now they just shored up that offensive line. So they've got to be considered a favorite to really, make a run at the Super Bowl and have to feel like they won the draft. The other team for me, the Arizona Cardinals, they got a versatile linebacker, safety. He's kind of a hybrid at number 8, Isaiah Simmons out of Clemson. Judging by everyone, all the experts at the NFL draft, it seems like Simmons is a real can't-miss player. I actually have a friend who is a Clemson alum, and she certainly believes that Simmons has a high upside. I've heard a lot of people say he's got Hall of Fame quality talent, so it'll be interesting to see if that comes to fruition in Arizona. As far as the big loss, I think it's got to be the Raiders. You could maybe you could nitpick the Giants. Maybe they took offensive tackle Andrew Thomas at 5. There were some other offensive linemen rated a little higher on the board, but it was kind of a coin flip on that. For me, the Raiders really missed. They had 2 first-round picks. They picked the cornerback who not a lot of people are in love with, and then obviously the Henry Ruggs pick. Letting Jerry Jeudy go, ultimately to Denver, then CeeDee Lamb going to the Cowboys. I would have certainly taken both of those receivers over Henry Ruggs. Ruggs certainly has the fastest 40 time of the 3. He's the quickest, but I can't say he's the best receiver of the 3. And to me, this screams John Gruden wants to be the smartest guy in the room at all times. He likes to think he makes the moves that make him the smartest guy in the room. And I ultimately anticipate this move, both of these picks backfiring on him. And I think it was a really bad decision to let some of those talented players go. And especially with Jerry Jeudy playing in Denver, they're going to play twice a year. They're in the same division. So Jerry Judy's going to get his chance every year to really show John Gruden that he made an error in that pick. So that is ultimately why I picked the Raiders as the team that lost the draft.
This is Emily from Office Essentials. Did you know that germs on hands can be transferred up to 7 times, making frequently touched surfaces in the office hotspots for viruses? And a virus can spread through an entire office in just a few hours. Some germs can even live for days on hard surfaces. So hotspots like door handles, keyboards, light switches, desktops, and even elevator buttons should be cleaned even more often. And don't forget about the kitchen. Break rooms have some of the germiest surfaces in the entire office. Sink faucets, microwaves, and refrigerator handles too. Office Essentials can help you protect your office from sickness this flu season. Right now at STLOfficeSupplies.com, we're offering a free printable poster that you can print and hang around your office. It contains tips to help coworkers prevent the spread of the flu. Office Essentials is your hometown supplier of all the office supplies and furniture you need to run and grow your business. Learn more today at STLOfficeSupplies.com.
Okay, unless you've been living under a rock the last couple of weeks, last night brought with it the next 2 episodes of the Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance on ESPN. I'm certainly invested in this program, so I took plenty of time to watch. I stayed up a little later than I usually do, but I've got my notes from the episodes. The first note, obviously, the 2 episodes focused on the Jordan Rules, the Detroit Bad Boy Pistons of the late 80s. They were as physical as a team probably ever was in basketball, and they were the arch rival and the nemesis of the Jordan Bulls. And while Michael Jordan in Chicago was trying to reach that next level to make the finals, they kept running into Detroit, and it was everyone knew that you couldn't stop Michael Jordan, especially when he got in the air. So what Detroit did under Chuck Daly is they put in the Jordan Rules. And what those Jordan Rules did were basically say you have to, obviously they had some strategic elements to it. You got to get him to go to his left. You got to keep him in certain areas of the court. But obviously when he gets in the paint, you put him down no matter what. And the episode obviously highlighted that very well, that anytime Jordan got in there, whether it was Rick Mahorn or Bill Laimbeer, Dennis Rodman, John Sally, any of those big guys in the middle, they put Jordan down, and they put him down hard. So much so that after Michael and the team lost, they skipped vacation in an off season leading into the 91 season. They all got together in the weight room. Jordan put on 15 pounds of muscle, and for an elite athlete to put on 15 pounds of muscle is not easy. And Jordan, he even said in the documentary, he wanted to be the one that dished out the pain going forward. And I think if not for those Detroit Pistons and the Bad Boys, you wouldn't get Jordan that we know going on to become the greatest basketball player of all time. He already had the desire and the hunger, but just that little extra chip on his shoulder seemed to put him over the top. And we finally got to see the real villain of this documentary series. We thought it was going to be Jerry Krause after the first 2 episodes. Enter Isaiah Thomas. Jordan and Isaiah never got along. There's plenty of stories you can find online about it. even to this day, you can sense on these 2 episodes that aired last night, the disdain Jordan has for Isaiah Thomas still is just palpable. And it really stems from the fact that in 91, when the Bulls ultimately beat the Detroit Pistons and made that next jump to the NBA Finals, Isaiah Thomas, Bill Laimbeer, the entire Pistons team, they walked off the court. They did not shake Jordan's hands. They did not shake anybody's hands on the Chicago Bulls. They showed no humility, no sportsmanship, and it really rubbed Michael the wrong way. Isaiah Thomas did his best to defend the scenario and said, oh, well, when we won and we beat the Celtics to make our run to the finals, they didn't show us any grace. They didn't show us any gratitude in shaking our hands, and they walked off the court. And, then they turned the camera over to Michael Jordan and showed him Isaiah talking about it. And that's where you really got the sense that Jordan and Isaiah just will never see eye to eye, because Jordan made a point to say, we lost to you twice in the 2 years leading up to this. And both times we were gracious. We shook your hands. We wished you well, and you did not reciprocate. And that really bothered Michael to the point where he said beating the Pistons was almost as great as winning his first title. So you just know how much he absolutely did not like the Detroit Pistons. And the other key to the 2 episodes last night, Dennis Rodman and Phil Jackson were really highlighted. Dennis Rodman, because he came from Detroit to Chicago. The episodes showed Dennis's journey from Detroit to San Antonio to Chicago. And I think what the episode did unbelievably well was show, number one, I don't know if there's ever been an athlete that's more unique and more interesting in the history of sports than Dennis Rodman, whether it's on the court, off the court, everything that went with Dennis Rodman's life. I think he still stands today as one of the most interesting athletes that ever lived. And it took a coach like Phil Jackson to really understand the mindset of Dennis Rodman. And I think that's why a couple of weeks ago, Dan and I were talking about our Mount Rushmore of coaches. And I said Phil Jackson was the first name that came off my head. I think he's the best coach maybe in American sports history. And I think it's because how he manages egos. It's one thing to be a great tactician. Obviously, he had Tex Winter, and they created the triangle offense in Chicago and then LA and won a bunch of championships through that. But it was more than just the X's and O's. It's really how you manage people. And that's what Phil is known for. He was called the Zen Master. And the episode gave us an excellent little window into how he managed Dennis Rodman. I can't imagine in 2020 a high-level athlete getting, in the middle of a season, a 48-hour vacation from the coach to just go and let loose. And in the episode, Scottie Pippen, in that 97-98 season, Scottie Pippen missed the first 30-plus games of the season. Dennis Rodman had to step up his role as Jordan's kind of his Robin to the Batman. He did it very well. He put everything aside. And then once Scottie came back, Rodman was so mentally drained that he needed to take a couple of days off. And Jordan will put it better than I ever could, but Jordan talked about, we got to let him go, but we can't let him go too wild or, you're never going to see Dennis again. And lo and behold, Dennis takes off to Vegas with his girlfriend at the time, Carmen Electra. Great anecdotes from Carmen Electra was in the episode, and Jordan had to kind of hangover style go find Dennis Rodman in Vegas. Lots of good stuff from that one. So I think the other thing with Dennis Rodman that I learned a lot about yesterday was he was a far greater player mentally than a lot of people give him credit for. And they showed him studying film in the locker room, and they even talked about how, Rodman said himself how he anticipated rebounds and why he is considered the greatest rebounder of all time. And when you watch Dennis in this episode, you can see he knew every player's tendency. He knew when Michael would go up to shoot, when he was with the Pistons, he knew when Michael would go up to shoot, where the ball would go. He knew how to anticipate, what Larry Bird does, what Magic Johnson does, what all these guys do. And that's what made Dennis Rodman great. And also the fact that even though he had an ego, obviously, he wasn't a ball hog, and he was the perfect person to put in the middle of Scottie and Michael. He knew his role. You could argue he's probably the best role player that's ever lived. He didn't care about scoring a single basket. His role was defense, rebound, agitation, disruption, and he did it expertly. So Dennis Rodman and Phil Jackson really well highlighted in that episode. I also thought the soundtrack, this is now 4 episodes in, 2 weeks in, the soundtrack has been immaculate. That's the only word that comes to mind is immaculate. The first episode, obviously, during the highlights of Jordan just lighting up the Celtics, they had that great piece of music by LL Cool J from the 80s. And then last night, I think the crescendo of the episode was Michael. It was his 87 or his 88 season when he was MVP, Defensive Player of the Year. They spliced together his highlight package with Prince's Party Man, which if you're familiar with Prince's Party Man song, it's the song that Jack Nicholson dances to in the original Batman movie as the Joker, where he's going through the art house and painting all the art on the walls and completely destroying it with graffiti. I never thought I could hear that song by Prince and not close my eyes and see Jack Nicholson as the Joker. And then last night, the way they shot that highlight montage of Jordan with the song, that will now be what I see when I hear that song. A couple other notes. It's impossible not to love Magic Johnson. I know Magic Johnson hasn't really been featured that much in these 4 episodes, but when you look at that 91 finals, it's in such stark contrast to the way Isaiah Thomas and the Pistons reacted. They were bitter, they were mad, they were angry, as a lot of us get when we lose games and lose in life. But Magic, he loses in 91, he loses in the finals. He kind of realizes Jordan is the man now. This is Jordan's league now. And instead of going the same direction as the Pistons, he goes the opposite direction, and he says, I couldn't have lost to somebody better than Michael. And he embraced Michael in the locker room right after the Bulls had won the championship. There's that iconic picture of them embracing. Magic said yesterday Jordan was crying in his arms. It was just really cool to see. Magic was a great elder statesman at that time to understand the situation. And I just can't see anyone ever disliking Magic Johnson. It just hammered home the fact that Magic Johnson is one of the best sportsmen we've ever seen. That infectious smile. A couple other takeaways. Jerry Krause, the first 2 episodes really featured how he sort of has a villainous nature about him, but you also can't deny the fact that he built that team. He made the right trades at the right time. He was very much encouraging to get Tex Winter and that triangle offense in place. He was the one that got Phil Jackson in ultimately. The problem with Jerry Krause, and Steve Kerr said this in one of the first 2 episodes, Jerry Krause couldn't get out of his own way. He had his own chip on his shoulder, and even though he built this tremendous team, he couldn't let his own ego aside, and ultimately he wanted to show that he was bigger than Michael Jordan, or he was bigger than Phil Jackson. He was the reason they'd won all these titles, and that has proved to have backfired, but I thought the episode did a really good job of just showing, while we all who love that 90s Bulls team don't think fondly of Jerry Krause, he deserves a lot of credit because he did get that team in place. Final takeaway, though, this documentary series, we're only 4 out of 10 episodes in. It's highlighting why Michael Jordan is and will always be the greatest athlete of all time. To me, to a lot of people, we at the STL Break ran a greatest athlete of all time tournament about a month or 2 ago, and Jordan pretty easily won that tournament, even over the likes of Muhammad Ali and LeBron James and all the other greats you can think of. Beyond just wins and losses, titles, everything else, this documentary is showing beautifully. Michael Jordan had the physical tools, he had the mental tools. It was the drive, though, that I've never seen from an athlete before and certainly haven't seen since. A couple have come close. I think Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, certainly from a physical standpoint, is on par. But Jordan had everything. He had no weakness. He was a good offensive player. He was a good defensive player. We're never going to see Michael Jordan again. It's never going to happen. The 6-0 finals record with 6 MVPs, again, a thing you're just never going to see. He's still the all-time leader in average points per game in the NBA over his career, a number you're also probably never going to see eclipsed. There's just so many things about Michael Jordan that make him, whether it's the shoes, the Nike brand, the dunk contest, it all creates this giant body of work that has stood the test of time. And in watching this again, having not seen a lot of these clips for 20 years, just hammering home, Michael Jordan is, always will be, the greatest athlete of all time. And hopefully a lot of the people younger than myself, in their teens and 20s, their eyes are opening to, oh my goodness, I thought LeBron James was the greatest player I've ever seen. This guy, Michael Jordan, is on another planet. I mean, it doesn't even come close. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with a few more headlines before we sign off.
Every morning, the smell of the break room can either lead you in or push you away. Office Essentials has a great coffee variety featuring St. Louis's own Caldies to make sure everyone at your office is caffeinated up and ready to take on the day.
All right, thanks for sticking around. Obviously, this is an abbreviated episode. I'm running this thing solo. Dan and the rest of the guys are out this week. Hopefully, we'll have them back next week. So we're just going to dive right into some more sports headlines, and then we're going to kind of finish everything up. News broke on Tuesday last week that the New England Patriots had traded Rob Gronkowski to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who is on a one-year deal for $10 million. The question everyone's asking now, are the Buccaneers a favorite, the favorite to make the Super Bowl? I'll throw my 2 cents in there. I don't think they're the favorite. I certainly think they're one of the favorites. I saw the Vegas betting line has them currently as the 5th best odds to win the Super Bowl. I think that's pretty fair. When I look at Rob Gronkowski, he's got a lot of miles on his body. He's injury prone. Sure, he's only 30, but he's a really old and brittle 30. He does have playoff experience, though. That could be crucial to Tampa when the playoffs come, because really only a couple of guys on that team are going to have any playoff experience. And the road to the Super Bowl is certainly easier for Tom and Rob in the NFC than it was in the AFC. In the AFC, you've got Lamar Jackson and the Ravens. You've got Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. Those are the 2 teams that you can look at right now and say they're going to be running the AFC for a few years. When I look at the NFC, San Francisco will certainly still be a credible challenge. New Orleans is going to be in there, Green Bay, the usual suspects. But there's no reason to believe that Tom Brady and the New England Patriots can't be a real contender to make the Super Bowl, and then it's a one-off if you make the Super Bowl. One game, all bets are off. If I was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, knowing what we know about Rob Gronkowski, I would play him very minimally in the regular season. He doesn't have to be option A for them, which is a very helpful thing. I would ease him back in, and then maybe when you get to game 12, 13, you kind of take the shackles off, you let him play a little more. He's needed in January. That's why they brought Rob Gronkowski in. They don't need him in game 2. They need him, in the wild card game or the divisional playoffs. So I think Rob Gronkowski was a brilliant move by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They kind of had New England in a position where Bill Belichick had no leverage. It's rare to see Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots get fleeced like that, but they really didn't have a lot of options. So I ultimately think Tampa Bay is going to be a real challenge for the Super Bowl this year. So keep your eyes on them. Another big story coming out of England last week was the Premier League announced the potential sale of Newcastle United. It's nearing completion to PCP Capital Partners. That's a Saudi Arabia-backed consortium. If the takeover goes through, everyone's wondering, will we see Newcastle make the same jump up the table that Manchester City did a decade ago? This one really hurts because I'm rooting for Newcastle to not have this deal go through. There have been a couple of stories out over the last week. There was actually a television broadcasting network that's trying to put a block on this move because Saudi Arabia has had some issues with piracy of football matches over in England. And so this television network's trying to block the move because they say Saudi Arabia has sort of been guilty of piracy, and this company that's looking to buy Newcastle United is basically the country of Saudi Arabia. The other issue is there are a lot of concerns with Saudi Arabia's track record of slave labor. And, it's a big black eye on Saudi Arabia and a lot of those Middle Eastern countries, unfortunately. We've seen some people step in and try to stop that on the basis of their labor history. I worry that if the deal goes through, you've then got Newcastle United, who are a very prestigious club, but they're certainly not over the last 20 or 30 years on the level of Manchester United, Liverpool, Chelsea, some of the other bigger clubs. This move will make Newcastle United the wealthiest club in England, even more than Manchester City. And all you have to do is look back over the last 10 years at what Manchester City have done. They've broken a number of violations when it comes to financial fair play. They're obviously going to be in the court this summer or whenever that comes up because they've got a potential 2-year Champions League ban, which would really be detrimental to a club of their nature that's trying to sort of buy their way into prestige. I think if the deal goes through, they're going to do the same thing that Manchester City did. They're going to spend a ton of money really quickly to try to be great. Because a league like England doesn't have a salary cap like we're used to over here in the States, they're just going to be able to buy players. They're going to get very good very quickly. And that's why it's imperative that the English FA and the governing bodies over in Europe put the hammer down on a club like Manchester City for what they did, because if this 2-year ban on the Champions League gets overturned and Manchester City basically get a slap on the hand for breaking all the rules that they've done, it's going to open the door for a club like Newcastle United to say, see, they did it. They got away with it. They won some titles because of it. We're going to do the same thing and maybe to a bigger degree. So keep your eyes on Newcastle United, a tiny little city up in England, because they're going to be making some big waves over the next year or two if this deal goes through to this Saudi consortium. A couple other news points before we finish up. Some XFL news. This kind of went under the radar, but it's worth mentioning that the former commissioner, Oliver Luck, is suing the XFL/WWE owner, Vince McMahon, for wrongful termination. It looks like things are about to get really ugly before they get better for the XFL. This, to me, appears like the final nail in the coffin for any hopes of an XFL return. Dan and I actually mentioned last week or the week prior that the one thing the XFL had going for it, even though it's already closed its doors and laid off all of its employees, was it still had Oliver Luck, who's a really sound football mind. He put a lot of good ideas in place. He's been a very transparent person as commissioner of the league. I think for all the league success it had in the 5 weeks it was around, Oliver Luck deserves a large amount of credit for that. And for Vince McMahon to fire him and now to have this lawsuit in place, I think the bridge has been burned between these two guys, and I don't see any way Oliver Luck comes back to help the XFL out if the league ever does try to put itself together again. And I don't know how they're going to find another guy with a better mind for the game, better ideas. This is a really bad blow for the XFL, who ultimately, even though I don't think it's a league that can sustain itself, I'm rooting for it to. Contrary to what Stu or somebody else might think, I actually would like to see another football league, succeed. I just don't think it's going to happen, unfortunately. And the XFL, with this situation, with the lawsuit that Oliver Luck is filing, is not a good sign that the XFL is ever going to see the light of day 2021 or beyond. So please weigh in. I just don't see how the XFL or the Battlehawks, unfortunately, are ever going to get to play another game. So the NHL is discussing a plan to restart their season. It's a really interesting plan that I'm going to weigh in on, and I'd like to get your opinion too if you're listening. So they're talking about doing a 4-city hosting remainder of their games. Each city would have 3 games per day. The early favorites, there have been a lot of cities and spots thrown out there, but the early favorites, from what a lot of people are hearing, Carolina. They've got the Carolina Hurricanes right now, Edmonton Oilers, obviously, and then Minnesota with the Minnesota Wild. Those are 3 cities that have been kind of front runners to get this 4-city plan in place. I love the idea, personally. It's not ideal, but we're in weird circumstances. There's no way you're going to have an ideal result, whether it's avoiding the season or just cutting the season off and saying, oh, we're going to jump right into the playoffs. There's no perfect scenario. So you might as well go with the best one that accomplishes what you need to do, and that's you still got games to finish in the regular season. You still have to have some sort of playoff to determine a champion. You might as well, limit the number of places people are traveling. This is going to cut down on all sorts of travel. You just take all the teams, you divide them up into these 4 cities, you put them up in a hotel. They should have plenty of opportunities to get practice time on an ice, and you finish the season in these 4 spots. I think it's a really smart plan. I anticipate if this plan goes through, you could see the NBA doing something similar. I know Major League Baseball has talked about doing kind of a play on this where obviously their season hasn't started yet, but they've talked about doing the 2 cities that host spring training every spring, having those 2 cities be the host cities for playing the majority of the Major League Baseball season. So you're seeing all these North American leagues kind of floating around the idea of limiting the number of cities these are played in. They're all going to be behind closed doors, which is okay, but they really want to take the initiative to get seasons going, finish seasons, etc. I'm a huge advocate for that. I think as long as the safety is in place and you're not jeopardizing any of these guys from getting anything, you might as well get it going sooner than later if you can, because obviously all you have to do is look at the NFL draft numbers. People are so hungry for sports right now. They will accept it in any terms, whether that's in an empty stadium, in a city you've never heard of, in a random city, whatever. We just want to watch sports, And it seems like we're getting closer to that point. We're still talking June or July realistically, but it's nice to see that these leagues have taken real steps to put into place to try to get back up and running so we can all get back to enjoying that thing we love, which is sports.
Is your office out of date? Is your furniture from the 20th century? With dedicated furniture designer specialists, Office Essentials can help transform your office into the newest, trendy designs. From collaborative spaces to standing workstations, let OE show you what we have.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. If you've been following along the last few weeks, you know we've been running a tournament on our Twitter page. That's the STL Break Twitter page. It's been the greatest sports video game of all time. We got down to the Elite Eight and the Final Four matchups last week, so here are those results. To no one's surprise, NHL 94 cruised through the 90s region, where it squared off with Mike Tyson's Punch-Out for a place in the finals. NHL 94 is the clear favorite for a reason, and its army of rabid social media fans came out in full force to help it get into the finals. There was also some intrigue on the other side of the bracket, though, where WWF No Mercy came through the 2000 through 2004 region as the 4 seed and went up against the 1 seed NBA 2K11 from the 2005 through present region. WWF No Mercy proved it's a true contender by pinning NBA 2K for the count and set up our final matchup. That matchup will get underway tomorrow, April 28th. It's going to be NHL 94 versus WWF No Mercy, and we'll have the announcement of the winner on next week's show. That'll do it for this week's episode. Be sure to tell your friends if you like what you heard, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss an episode, and we'll be back again next week.